Welcome to the Encourager Podcast with Rebekah Scott. I believe that if you desire an active, impactful role in your children's lives while simultaneously wanting to provide an income for your family, then being a mompreneur is exactly what you need to work from home. The Encourager Podcast is my way of inspiring and motivating you with insightful knowledge, tips, and advice from myself and other successful working women who want to put their families first. You can do this. We're going to help walk through it. Let's take action and encourage one another. Hello, encouragers. I am super excited. And you guys have heard me speak before, but I'm like cold sweating excited to have this guest on today. I have tuned in today. I have Angie Sattler, who is my executive assistant to my business, Rebekah Scott Designs. And then I also have Joshua Becker on.
Hello.
Hello.
I always tell you guys what's going on in the studio today in case you hear a little bit of banter in the background here. We've got Jovi with us. She's 1.5, and we've got Roslyn awake and Pixon is sleeping. So they may be in and out. Right now they're feeding treats to the horses, but if we hear a little background noise, you guys know what's going on. But I did kind of line up some nannies and stuff so we could hear every last word that Joshua has to feed us because it's going to be awesome. So Joshua Becker is what I would say, Joshua, is that you're the leading expert on the topic of minimalism. And we'll talk a little bit more about minimalism if this term is new to you as we ask Joshua some questions here. But we would just like to ask a few things like, where are you from, Joshua, and where do you live now?
Thank you for the kind words. I am currently living in Peoria, Arizona, northwest suburb of Phoenix. But originally, I am from upper Midwest, born and raised in Aberdeen, South Dakota. Went to high school in North Dakota, finished college in Nebraska, spent some time in Wisconsin, and even a little time in Vermont. So been around a little bit, but we've been in Phoenix for coming up on 7 years, and really do like it.
So it's kind of like South Dakota weather, I suppose, with it being so arid. Other than the snow, it's arid like western South Dakota.
Yes. No, I think that Phoenix weather and South Dakota weather are almost identical.
Awesome. I love that you have a little South Dakota background in there. That is awesome. And then what is your family made up of, Joshua?
My wife, Kimberly, we've been married for 18 years. And I have 2 kids. My son, Salem, is 15, freshman in high school, and my daughter, Alexa, is 11, and she's in 6th grade.
Now, have you guys started school down there like we have?
Yeah, we start down here pretty early in August, which is, I don't know, seems like most states start earlier and earlier. But we started early August, and it's actually pretty good because it's so hot in Phoenix that kids can't play outside, at least not for very long during the summer, as opposed to when I was in North Dakota when you couldn't play outside in the winter. So anyway, it works pretty well. They're in school early in August, and then they get extra time off in like November and January, and so it works out pretty well.
Cool. Awesome. To explain minimalism the best, I would like you to recap the opening scene. We have several books, but the book that I've listened to quite a few times is More of Less. Recap the opening scene when you're cleaning out the garage, because I think that's what our listeners and audience will most relate to this scene.
Yes, sure. Thank you. And thanks for the opportunity, because I think it does explain minimalism pretty well. This was 9 years ago. I was living up in Vermont. It was Memorial Day weekend, so this was late May. And we were finally getting around to spring cleaning our house after the long Vermont winter and mud season of spring. And my son was 5. I volunteered to go clean out the garage, as you typically do after the winter. Everything was kind of dirty and muddy and disheveled. And so I told my son, who I was hoping would help me clean the garage. Didn't last very long, but that was the hope anyway. I'm like, hey, here's what we do. We pull everything out into the driveway. We hose everything down. We'll return everything in this nice organized fashion. So I asked my son Salem to go grab a blue plastic bin and pull it out into the driveway, which ended up being a mistake because his plastic bin was full of all of his summer toys, wiffle ball bats and wiffle balls, right? Hadn't seen it all winter long. And of course, as soon as he saw his toys, the last thing he wanted to do is help me clean out the garage anymore. So he grabs his toys, he goes in the backyard to play. I start working on the garage. One thing leads to another, and hours later, I'm still kind of working on this garage. My son, of course, is running, as any 5-year-old would, running up about every 20, 30 minutes, asking me to come play with him and when I was going to be done. And I just kept pushing him off, right? I'm almost done. We'll play when I'm done. I'm just a couple more minutes. Anyway, my neighbor, my next door neighbor, was doing all of her yard work on the same Saturday morning. And she, of course, is watching this scene, I think, unfold on my side of the hedge. And we happen to walk past each other at one point, and she says, very sarcastically, of course, she says, "Oh, the joys of home ownership." And I said, well, you know what they say, the more stuff you own, the more your stuff owns you. And she responds with this really life-changing sentence. She says to me, yeah, you know, that's why my daughter is a minimalist. She keeps telling me I don't need to own all this stuff. And I remember standing speechless, as if this was the first time in the world somebody had told me that I didn't have to own everything. But I remember looking back at my driveway, which has this pile of dirty, dusty things I'd spent all morning moving around and taking care of. And out of the corner of my eye, I see my 5-year-old son swinging alone on the swing set in the backyard. And suddenly had this realization that not only were my things not making me happy, which we would all say, right? Yeah. But not only were my things not making me happy, but all the things I owned were actually taking me away from the very thing that did bring me happiness, and not just happiness, but purpose and fulfillment. And so that began our journey. I think the realization that sparks minimalism, or at least, you know, any desire to own less, the realization is that our things not only are not making us happy, but all the things we own are actually distracting us from the very things that do. So that's how I like to introduce minimalism. Thanks for letting me tell the long version of the story. I hope that was okay.
Yes, it's excellent, because I truly, you know, you were in the right place to hear the sarcasm in your neighbor's voice, and then you could have left it like that. But you were in the right place to hear what she said with the daughter. And so it resonated with you. And then, of course, as we all relate to that scene, when your child is playing something, when they've begged and begged, and then they just give up on you. They're like, forget it. You are obviously not going to play with me. And that is just, I have a book as well. My opening scene in that is similar to that. It's like my son was asking for a snack over and over, and I just had to get the work done. And I'm just really grateful that you had that moment and that you were able to listen to it, because how many of us just move past it and say, well, I'll make time on Sunday to be with him. But you decided in that moment that your whole life would shift. And so that happened, and you have now this whole blog, and if you'll read his books, you'll understand where it's come to with all these different books and stuff. So we're going to take a deeper dive into minimalism off of that moment that you had. And my journey with minimalism started, if I get a free Saturday, if I'm not sewing or DIYing something, painting something, I am purging. I love to get rid of stuff, just get rid of it. I didn't really know it had a name, but I love to purge. And we live in a 140-year-old farmhouse that's pretty small with one bathroom. And my husband did build the studio space on for me to do my work, but we need to live with less because of our space restraints. And I couldn't figure out when I was teaching people on the podcast about the laundry system, where I would brag confidently, I can do my laundry in one day, I can fold everything in 25 minutes and put everything in everybody's drawers in 15. And I couldn't figure out why people kept writing into Angie and I and saying, I cannot understand her laundry system. What detergent are you using? As if, that would somehow magically change it. And that's when it dawned on me, I am sort of, believe me, not to where I need to be, living this minimalism lifestyle. And so that's why I said, Angie, we have got to find somebody. We were just thinking local, small, as we often do as humans instead of large like God wants us to. I thought, well, let's find a minimalism gal or somebody in Sioux Falls. And she said, wouldn't it be awesome if we could have Joshua Becker on the podcast? And we were like, well, yeah, it would be, but... And you reached back. So here you are. So that's why I told a little bit of my laundry system and then what I do on Saturdays if I have this free time. So I thought maybe you could tell us a little bit about what, I should say my key takeaways from the book, The More of Less, is that when you are serving things, whether you're just straightening up one more thing or putting away one more thing that they only played with for 5 minutes or whatever, you're serving things and not serving people. And that includes your own family. So that was one of my main takeaways from that. And that each person has a different definition of minimalism, which I'm sure you'll talk a little bit more about. And then this is the big one that I was like, he probably thinks this is a little silly, but my takeaway, a big one was, if the job takes less than 1 to 2 minutes, you should do it now. I'm like, oh, so you mean when I bake something and I put the KitchenAid in the sink and I put Dawn soap in it and I run the water for 30 seconds, I should probably just go ahead and wash it instead of leaving it till the end of the day? I'm like, oh, that's what he means. So I started acting those a little bit in my day-to-day. So those were some of my key takeaways, and I hope you guys are going to take awesome notes, and we'll have a great reflection guide for you after Joshua pours all this wisdom on us about some other tangible things that we can take action on now. Would you sum up minimalism for yourself, Joshua, in a couple sentences, and then we'll go to our other questions here?
Yeah, sure. I define minimalism as the intentional promotion of the things we most value by removing everything that distracts us from it. So in my garage story, right, what do I value most is my family and raising my children well and being a good husband and father. And I could see how all the things that I had accumulated were actually keeping me from doing what I really wanted to do in life and what I really wanted to accomplish in life. And one of the things that I think is very interesting about this conversation, when I think when some people hear the word minimalism, at first they're a little apprehensive and I'm not so sure I'm interested in that, right? Like all these images kind of conjure up in their mind. But when you have a moment to explain what you mean by it, I actually find very few people who disagree. Like most people are genuinely drawn to the idea of freeing up more time and space and energy for the things that they most value and the things that really bring them joy and purpose and fulfillment in life. It's part of the problem is that we just live in this. We live in this world where we're constantly being sold things, just this super consumeristic society and culture, and we see all these advertisements, and they're always telling us that we'll be happier if we buy whatever they're selling. And I think we just hear that message so many times and from so many places that we buy into it and we subscribe to it more than we would ever have admitted that we do. And suddenly we end up with more laundry than we can handle in a day, and we end up with homes that are, you said 140 years old. The average American home has tripled in the last 50 years. And so we end up with homes that are too big, with closets that are too full, and garages overflowing. And it just begins to consume our lives far more than we realize until I think someone comes along and like, hey, maybe you don't have to own, maybe there's a different way. And so, yes. So all that to say, minimalism looks very different from one person to another because it's based on values. It's based on what's important. I know some people who want to become minimalist so that they can travel the world. People who want to become minimalist so they can change their job or quit their job, or they want to become minimalist so they can get out of debt or give more. They want to become minimalist so they can spend more time with their family, right? Like whatever we're hoping to do with our lives, the way we're going to practice minimalism always changes that, or that always changes, I think, how we end up practicing minimalism in our lives.
Yes, because it could look so different to each person because of what they value. And you can go all the way down to just one suitcase and traveling all over the world to just making sure that your home is organized. So it can go on all different extremes, just like everything can be on a spectrum.
Yeah. So a pretty good example would be my friend Logan and Tammy Strobel. They lived up, I think they live in California now, but 9 years ago they were up in Portland, and they had a lot of debt, and they downsized from their, typical Portland home down to a 200 square foot tiny home that they were able to park in their friend's backyard. And like, they got out of debt in no time, right? Obviously, you could imagine. And then I'm looking at my life, and I'm like, well, I have 2 kids, so maybe a 200 square foot tiny home isn't going to work. But even more than that, like, I like my neighborhood. I like my school district. I like my kids' friends and the friends that I have. And I don't want to uproot and move into a 200 square foot tiny home just so I can get out of debt. Like, I want to downsize so I could be more available to my neighbors and be more active in my community and more available with my kids. So that's how values change. That also, I think, like, talents and passions, a minimalist farmer is going to own different things than a minimalist writer or a minimalist teacher or a minimalist mechanic, just because they have different talents and gifts. So they're all going to own different things. So it's always going to look different.
Yeah, because you're not going to go through my fabric closet, right, Joshua? I mean, I need those fabrics, so minimalism, but you could definitely go through my kitchen, You
are going to have to go through your fabrics yourself.
Yes. Okay, so that helps define it a little bit. That was a great summary of how each person can be different, can approach this in different extremes as well. What advice do you have on where to start? And I know your book, Simplify, kind of talks us through, and my husband and I are going to be going through your course, and we'll also do some follow-up podcast, everybody, on Nick and I, because this could be a pretty comical between spouses, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that as well. But do you have a room that you're like, okay, mamas, start with this room because you'll get the most momentum? Because I think partly what you talk about in your book is you just get so overwhelmed. So it's like, I don't even know where to start. So you just don't. So then you click and buy some really cool, cute containers, hoping that will make it better. And it doesn't. It just makes it worse. It just looks cute in the box. So can you give us, like, what example would be a room to start in or a dresser to start in that would get us the most momentum going forward?
Yes, good. I like the way you talk, and I like the way you phrase that. I think a lot of people get kind of caught up in, number one, I could never do this because I could never get rid of my yarn stash, or I could never get rid of my books, and so I can't implement these principles anywhere else. Or, oh man, the garage, I don't even know where to start. So what I always tell people to do is I tell people to start in the easiest, most lived-in area of their home. And so for me, actually, the place I started wasn't a room at all. It was in my car. Because I was cleaning out the garage, I put my car out in the street. And at the end of the day, after my life was changed and I began seeing all the things around me differently, I remember pulling my car into the driveway. And I'm looking inside my car, and there's all these things that didn't need to be there. There's pens and maps and CDs and sunglasses and books and Happy Meal toys and like all these things that didn't need to be in my car. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, this just doesn't need to. I grabbed a bag. I just threw everything in the bag that didn't need to be there. Left literally like just the basics, like just license, registration, and insurance, and a pair of sunglasses maybe. And the next morning, I sit in my car, and it felt so different. It was calm. It was peaceful. It's like I could focus on the day, on my drive, rather than all the stuff around me, and rather than the ball rolling, in the passenger side. And I just thought, man, I want to feel this in other places. I want this other spots in my home. And so we went to the living room, which for me was not a difficult place to get started, but there were decorations that didn't need to be there. There was old DVDs that no one watched. There's like a magazine rack with magazines that were never going to be read ever again. And we just kind of went through the living room and again, just took out everything that didn't absolutely need to be in the living room. And then what do you know? I sit in the living room at the end of the day, at the end of that project. I'm like, this feels great. Like, where else can I do this? And so, bedroom, closet, and bathroom, and just always working easiest to hardest, kind of like almost like building up that muscle, I think, a little bit. So you get used to knowing how to do it. And then, when you get to the harder things, the fabrics and the books or the sentimental things, you're a little bit mentally prepared for it and ready to kind of tackle that anew.
Well, I think, like you said, once you get momentum and the feeling is what you're ultimately going for obviously, how do I want to phrase this? But the feeling of being clear and the way you describe it to book, I would say the word craving. I just craved that peace that you felt in the car. And I think we all crave that, but we don't know how to fill the hole or this craving. And so we crave more instead of less. And so if we can reverse that way of thinking of, if I just have a prettier decoration, then I'll feel good. When maybe you just need to remove the decoration altogether. Like maybe that's what it is, and think less instead of more. The momentum will keep going, the cleaner and the more present you feel in all of these moments. Because who can concentrate on your 2-year-old when they're begging you for something, when you're staring at like so many different little things all over the countertop and you can't even tell what they're saying, because as much as you like to say, oh, I'm paying attention to them, you're not, because these things are taking up mental bandwidth as well rather than your kiddo.
Yeah. Yeah. When we started minimizing, like, it didn't take long at all before I started recognizing how owning less was like genuinely improving my life. Like I had more time. I was spending less time cleaning and organizing, so I had more time and I had more money because I was buying less, and I had less stress and fewer distractions
and fewer decisions.
Fewer decisions to make. I feel like I was becoming a better example for my kids. Like even like contentment and generosity and gratitude. Like all these things began to emerge, almost like everything I've wanted in life, more time and more opportunity to pursue the things I was passionate about. Everything I wanted in life, I could find on the other side of owning less. It's just that we're just told the opposite, right? That your better life is found on owning more and having more, as opposed to just taking a step back and really wondering, kind of questioning those assumptions.
That was one of my next questions is, what area of your life personally was most affected by minimalism? And you just answered it. It's not necessarily that you obviously had less things, but it freed you up, like it personally affected your spiritual life and your mental life and your financial life and your, like all these different categories start opening up and becoming more important because you can concentrate on them better, or at least recognize them easier. Yeah. If you're always straightening up everything in your living room, I always say, like, to moms in the same stage of life, like, do we enjoy our living rooms at this stage of life? Because, like, they're always crowded with a lot of the kids' stuff, and we're busy until basically everybody goes to sleep. And do we actually sit in there and enjoy that space? So then do we sit and enjoy our kitchen space? And do we avoid those spaces because they are so crowded? So that's why we move 100 miles an hour, because we're not actually facing that all of our stuff is consuming us.
Yeah. Intentionality is probably the word that I use most of all to describe what was the greatest benefit. I found that minimalism brought greater intentionality into my life. Because I don't think you sit across the table from anybody and ask them, hey, what do you most want in life? Like, nobody says, my greatest goal in life is to just own as much stuff as possible, right? We talk about love, and we talk about faith, and we talk about relationships, and we talk about, living a significant, life that makes a difference. Like, that's what we we dream for our lives. That's what we really want. And then Saturday afternoon comes along and you have a conversation with your neighbor and you're like, I don't want to spend my whole life taking care of stuff in my garage. How did I get to this point? Like, this is not how I would have sat down and drawn out what I want my life to look like. I was clearly living very unintentionally, buying what everyone else was buying what the world told me to buy, buying what the marketers told me to buy, spending my money and time on those things rather than the things that I really want to be doing and really want to be accomplishing it. And so it brought intentionality in the things that we own, and then it brought intentionality in the way we spent our time and where I was, the relationships in my life. That idea began influencing everything about me.
Yeah, if there's anything I can offer, it's all these last 5 minutes of your conversation. It's just such a craving to have that, especially relationship building when we're so distracted right now, not only by things, but by our phones, by like technology and all of that. If we could clear some of that out to have more intentionality towards the things that matter, what big of a difference that would make for all of us. Is there any area in your life where you don't practice minimalism? Or what was the hardest area for you to start?
Okay. When you said that question, I first interpreted it pretty broadly. So are there any areas in life where I don't practice minimalism? I would say that there are a lot of areas. I want to be minimal in the things that I own so that I can maximize all these other areas, right? So I can maximize relationships with my family and even do my work well. So I minimize distractions so that I can maximize the things I do want my life to accomplish. In terms of physical possessions, is there anything that I don't live minimally? No, I really can't think of anything where I'm really trying to buy a lot of this stuff. So no, not in terms of the things that I own, but certainly in, I want to maximize more of what I want my life to be about by getting rid of the other things.
Okay. So in our pre-interview, we talked about possibly going golfing on Monday, and I know that in your book you talked about, I think you were selling your golf clubs. Are you going to rent ones when you do go, or how's that going to
go? Yes, I was going to go with my brother-in-law, and almost every time I don't golf that much anymore. I golfed a little bit when I was in high school and did some golfing before my kids were born. My son's 15 and not really interested in golfing. I suppose if he became interested in golfing, then maybe I could want to do that. But I golf about once a year and almost always borrow clubs from a friend when I do.
It is so smart. How we, as the listeners and I myself, sometimes we have some guilt when we're trying to get rid of something because we realize that there was time and energy and money exchanged when we consume this item. How would you help us either get rid of or deal with that sort of guilt?
So a couple things come to mind. Number one, I was a finance major in college, and one of my favorite classes in high school was accounting, of all things. And I remember in accounting, there's this term referred to as a sunk cost, which is basically this idea that, hey, if you buy a machine to produce a good, and after a few years later, a better machine comes out that's cheaper and can function better than the one you had before, you can't say, yeah, but we spent so much money on that old thing, we need to keep using it. You just say, no, that's a sunk cost, it's gone, and if this new machine can work better, then that's what I do. So anyway, that's a long thing to say.
I see what you're saying.
Right. So there's a point where you're like, hey, if I made a mistake buying things and I'm no longer using them and I don't need them, they're in the way more than they're, helping me fulfill my purpose in life, then there's just a sunk cost associated to it. And it doesn't do you any good to keep carrying that on and spending effort and energy and more of your life caring for it, don't carry that cost forward. You get rid of it and you move on with your life. Now, I'm a big proponent of donating and becoming generous with the things that we have. And a lot of people, I think, get caught up in the, hey, I want to sell everything that I'm getting rid of. And selling things often adds, I think, time and effort and energy to an already pretty burdensome process of decluttering our homes. And so I say, look, if you don't need the money, or if it's not a really expensive item, then just donate it and just give it away to someone who can use it and does need it, because almost every item that you can think of, like there's someone somewhere who probably in your own community actually who could actually use it and benefit from it. And in that way, right, generosity almost has its own rewards in that way. And say, look, I bought this a long time ago. I don't use it. It's not doing me any good, but it can do me some good if I find someone who needs it and find someone who can use it. So my daughter was 2 when we started this process, and we decided we were going to have 2 kids. And so my daughter was 2. And so my wife had a lot of baby things that that my daughter had outgrown, and maternity stuff that she wasn't going to need anymore. And we found the local pregnancy center, the crisis pregnancy center in Vermont, and just donated a lot of our baby stuff there. And it was just like, there's a special joy, I think, in knowing that these items are going to go to someone who is in a difficult circumstance, and this can be a real blessing to them.
Yeah, that's. I love that you thought through not just dropping off at Goodwill, because there's a lot to be said when you can wrap your brain around who it is you're giving to, and even if you get to see that person, that exchange of humanness is very powerful. I mean, Goodwills
I agree.
All those are great, but there's a shift that happens when you see the person you're giving to or understand the organization that much more of what a blessing this is to them.
I agree. Totally. I'm pro Goodwill. I'm pro Salvation Army. I'm pro all those things. But I always tell people, like, look for research, find a local charity that you believe in. 3 come to mind really well, like the Crisis Pregnancy Center. Like almost every area has a local one. We were in Vermont, and there was a refugee resettlement program that took a lot of our housewares, a lot of the dishes that we weren't needing, and pots and pans, and even decorations and lamps, as they're helping refugees get set up in their new apartments and living their new life. Also, look for a battered woman's clinic, that type of space.
Those are great
particularly
places
if you're getting rid of, like mom's going through her closet and getting rid of some of those things. I mean, some of those women just, escaped in the middle of the night with their kids in their arms, and the clothes in your closet would be a real generous gift to them.
Yes. Awesome. Those are excellent ideas. Encouragers, I hope that you took a ton of notes, and we'll write a lot in our reflection guides for you to think about as well. And we encourage you to download, read, Audible, whatever you can to consume as much as Joshua Becker has been doing, because it will cause a big shift in your life. And then when I start talking about how fast I'm doing things because I'm the weirdo that likes to time things, you'll be like, I get it now. I know how she's doing it. So we are going to have Joshua back on here to talk a little bit more details about how to do this with our kiddos. So until next time, encouragers, we got this.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you've not done so, please subscribe to the show so that the latest episode will always be conveniently available on your device. You can also find the show notes on my website at shoprsd.com. That's shop with R as in Rebekah, S as in Scott, and D as in designs.com. The Encourager Podcast tab is at the bottom of my website with the reflection guides. And also be sure to check out our Facebook page where we encourage one another weekly, and then any information on coaching with me, and also the Becca Days or the Becca Workshops. I sincerely hope you feel encouraged and empowered to tackle anything that comes your way this week. Remember to be grateful, humble, and kind, then joy will come ushering in. We got this, encouragers.